Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Once in a while, something hits the news where I get bombarded with comments from people saying, Steve, did you see this? Did you see this? Did you see this? And I appreciate it. I really do. Okay. And I know people who send me stuff because they suspect I missed it or I didn't see it. And that happens a lot. And I've had people say, Steve, I know you got this a million times, but no, you're the first one to send it to me. But I got one yesterday and this morning where people are saying, Steve, I know you've gotten it, but you've got to talk about this. So I have to thank, I'm not making this up, William, Keith, Jacob, George, John, Jason, Jeffrey, Mark, and Daryl, who all passed along this story or some version of it from different news organizations that made national news, probably made international news, but from the Detroit Free Press. Detroit funeral home discovers woman declared dead is actually alive. And yes, this is exactly what you think it is. In fact, my good friend Mark, I mentioned him there, sent me a note and said, Steve, is this real? Like this one sounds too weird to be true, but is it real? Well, as it turns out, Frank Witzel writes, reports of her untimely death were greatly exaggerated. So a woman who's 20 years old from Southfield was pronounced dead early Sunday morning after she had a heart attack. She was then taken to a Detroit funeral home where staff found she was not in fact dead, but still alive. So funeral home actually makes their money handling the deceased. So the woman's no longer deceased. It's not their business anymore, is it? And now, well-known plaintiff's attorney Jeffrey Feiger is representing her. I've mentioned Jeffrey Feiger before. Feiger is one of the best-known attorneys in the country. And he's famous for high-profile cases and getting huge results. He's won more than 165 verdicts and settlements of $1 million or more. Okay, so cases he's had where he got $1 million or more for his client, he's had 165 of them. He now represents the woman declared dead who woke up in a funeral home. He's also successfully defended assisted suicide Dr. Jack Kevorkian. That was back in the day, of course. Southfield officials have tried to explain how this mistake took place in an announcement they made later on Sunday. And the announcement was sent on behalf of the city's fire chief. Because this was partly involving EMTs. Somebody called emergency. And so technically it's the fire department, I guess, that this falls under. The subject line of the memo they sent out was mistaken pronouncement of death. Mistaken pronouncement of death. But then they even later required a correction on that one. And the story went viral on social media. And people have commented on things such as what it would be like to be embalmed alive. Now, the woman was not embalmed, so that's just people running wild with their imaginations. But a Seattle attorney, Emily Albrecht, contacted the Free Press, and she specializes in mortuary litigation. And yes, there is such a thing, and I just learned about it now like you did. She said the story was so rare, she was herself wondering if it was true. But after looking into it, she said that it sounds like the funeral home saved a woman's life. So the funeral home is not who's at fault here. Someone brings in the remains of a person and said, here's someone you're going to be dealing with. Funeral home goes, they're not dead. That's not the funeral home's fault. Okay? In fact, the funeral home is actually the good guy here. So the attorney says, when I first saw this, I thought, no way. According to the Southfield Fire Department, which would not release the victim's name, paramedics responded to a 911 call for a woman who was not breathing. They arrived, they performed CPR, they tried to revive her. After 30 minutes, they concluded she likely was no longer alive. Now, here's the thing. I don't know if this is Frank Witzel's wording or if this is the wording they used, but you do understand that alive or dead is a binary proposition. Something is either alive or it's dead. Okay, there's no gray area. I know some of you are saying, but Steve, there is. No, if there's a gray area, you're still alive. You're alive until you're dead. Then you're dead. Now, it's true that someone could be technically dead and possibly be revived, at which point they'd be alive. We've all heard about that. Someone's heart stops beating and someone comes over to CPR and kickstarts them. Kickstart my heart. And that's true. But the point is that at any given moment in time, you are either dead or you are alive. Dead or alive. So to realize and conclude she was likely no longer alive. Well, is she or isn't she? So they followed the procedures in place at the time. I suspect these are changing soon. The paramedics contacted the Oakland County Medical Examiner's office. That is what we used to call in the old days the coroner. The coroner. We'll talk about that in a second. But later, the fire department clarified in a statement that a local emergency department physician pronounced the woman dead. The question is, where was the local emergency department physician when they declared her dead? Were they standing at the side of the deceased, or were they someplace else on a phone? That's the question. So the body was released to her family to make funeral arrangements. The funeral home in Detroit confirmed it picked up the body hours later. But at the funeral home, employees saw her apparently breathing as her chest was rising and falling, and they called emergency, who then took the woman to the hospital for treatment. And the funeral home added, its thoughts and prayers are with this young woman and her family. So again, the funeral home is the hero here. But the strange part is, and I've seen a variety of tellings of this story, and I do not know the answers to these questions, but the question is, somebody reports 20-year-old woman's not breathing. The emergency people go to her house and try to revive her and come to the conclusion that she's probably dead. At that point, somebody declares her dead, and I believe she gets taken from there to the funeral home. And the question is, was there ever a physician in attendance, in the presence of this woman, who actually looked at her, maybe touched her, maybe put an instrument on her like a stethoscope? Was there ever a physician who did that? And the reason I know about this is I wrote the book about the Italian Hall disaster, where 73 people died in a stampede trying to get out of a theater when someone yelled fire, but there's no fire. Happened in 1913. And among the pieces of evidence that we can look at today in an attempt to unravel what happened that day are the death certificates of the 73 people. And there was a coroner at the time. The coroner's office was replaced by the medical examiner in later years. They renamed it. But back then, the coroner who did the job didn't have to be a doctor. Now, today, a medical examiner must have a physician's license, among other things. And so back then, the coroner would simply be somebody who was elected to do the job, and they would make sure the death certificates got filled out properly. And I can tell you that back in 1913, the law required one of two things to happen. If somebody died in a medically attended death, that is, a doctor is right there, it's usually in the hospital, but somebody dies and a doctor is right there, the doctor can sign the death certificate. If, however, the person died in a medically unattended setting, they died at home, they died at work, or as a result of a homicide, suicide, or an accident, then the medical examiner was required to hold an inquest and then conduct an inquest to determine the cause of death, and then fill the death certificate out and indicate which of those three it was. And now, if a person died at home of natural causes, okay, they could have someone sign the death certificate. A doctor could probably come in and look, and I think it happened quite a bit. But generally speaking, if they just found somebody out in the woods dead, okay, we have no idea what happened. We found a dead body, okay? Well, the coroner, having no medical training, couldn't sign off on why that person died. So they'd hold an inquest. And the inquest usually amounted to, they'd bring in some experts, and quite often they'd simply just grab a jury of people, inquest jury, who would examine the facts, and a lot of times a doctor would come in and say, yes, I examined the person, here's what it looked like to me. But because they were not the actual attending physician at the time of the death, they couldn't come out and say, yes, I was there when he died. So they'd have to admit, I looked at the body later and came to this conclusion. Okay, so that's the old school coroners. It was very sloppy. The coroner at the Italian Hall disaster mishandled all 73 death certificates horribly. I've written quite a bit about this. And the death certificates are a gold mine of evidence, but they also are just an indicator of how inept an elected official can be when someone's elected to the wrong position. Because the guy who was doing the coroner's work up at that time did not know what he was doing. It was mind-numbingly idiotic what he did. So in this case, where we have a medical examiner who is in charge of the office of death certificates, okay, there, I believe, is a requirement under state law that somebody with authority is the one who says, yes, this person's dead. And the question now becomes, who made that call? Who made that call? Because I'd be interested to see if the death certificate had been generated yet. Because I have a sneaky feeling that it probably had begun being generated. The question is whether it had actually gotten just piled up with a stack of paperwork, or if somebody actually filled in all the blanks and submitted it for signature, or if it got filed. Because I'd love to see who was the doctor, who signed it. Was it the medical examiner? Or was there actually a physician at the emergency room who signed off and said, yes, she's dead? Because she wasn't dead. Now, I understand there'd be people in the audience who are going to say, Steve, what if some miraculous thing happened where she actually was dead and something happened and she got revived? Isn't that possible? Hypothetically possible. It might be hypothetically possible. But I suspect that most doctors are going to say, and again, I'm not a doctor, but I suspect most doctors are going to say that if you actually laid eyes on the person, you wouldn't just go, oh, they're dead. You look at them and go, what happened? When did it happen? Is there a chance they can be revived? And we will work to revive them. And so the question is, was this person dead for 30 minutes? Because that's how long they say they worked on her. Was she dead for several hours? Because that seems highly unlikely that if she was dead for a couple hours, she'd come back to life. So very, very strange case. And I suspect a lot more is going to come out about this. So again, a 20-year-old Southfield woman pronounced dead after EMTs worked on her for half an hour was shipped to a funeral home. And at the funeral home, the workers said, hey, she's breathing. We think she's alive. They called emergency, and another group of emergency people took her to the hospital where she is today. So Jeffrey Fieger is involved. So we will hear more about this, I assure you. Jeffrey Fieger is one of my heroes. As an attorney, I could do a whole show about Jeffrey Fieger. I've met him, and he's one of the most accomplished attorneys in the state of Michigan. Like I said, 165 verdicts and settlements of $1 million or more. So the guy gets the job done. But he's also no stranger to the media. He's not shy about the media. I suspect that cameras energize him. So we'll hear more. But again, thank you to William, Keith, Jacob, George, John, Jason, Jeffrey, Mark, and Daryl for sending it. No, I didn't miss it. And yes, it was in the Free Press, the paper I delivered as a child. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. For true success, ask yourself these 4 questions. Why? Why not? Why not me? Why not now?